This is New York Times Siena and Marist College, the most accurate pollsters in 2022. On 538 pollster ratings, New York Times Siena has all the 3 stars, and Marist College is like half a star short. They have 2.5. If you look at their polls here, you can see that they were pretty damn accurate. I guess not the North Carolina and Ohio one. And because they were accurate in a year where so many wrong predictions were made, in a year where people generally expected a red wave to occur, but instead only a red puddle, people believe that these polls are more reputable, more reliable, uh, and more accurate, and should be given special attention compared to polls who were not as accurate in 2022. On the surface, this appears to be true given limited information. These Let's take a look at what they said in 2020. These were their polls for 2020. As you can see, in Pennsylvania, most college had Biden up by 4 to 5. Arizona, they were pretty spot on in Arizona. In North Carolina, they had Biden up by 5 to 6. In Florida, they had Biden up by 4 to 5. In the general popular vote, they had Biden up by 10, 11. These are all catastrophically inaccurate polls. It's the same story for New York Times Siena. In Florida, they had Biden up by 3. In Pennsylvania, they had Biden up by 6. In Wisconsin, they had Biden up by 11. Actually, we forgot to get the Marist College. They also had Biden up by a similar amount, but I guess they get a bit more slack because it was in September, but still very wrong. These guys had Biden up by 11 on October 29th. Arizona, Biden up by 6. Uh, North Carolina, Biden up by 3. Michigan, Biden up by 8. Nevada, Biden up by 6. Texas, Trump up by 4. The most accurate poll here. Okay, that's about all of them. What I said earlier in the video April this year is not that polls are just about correcting the margin, about whether you see a Democratic pollster, so you just add some to the Republican candidate, and see a Republican slanted pollster, so you add some to the Democratic candidate, and that accounts for the bias. Polls poll demographics that are supposed to be representative of the electorate, and the people they poll are supposed to be representative of those demographics. Polls paint a picture of the reality we live in, and they're supposed to be used to judge what reality we live in. And they paint different pictures of it, and we have to decide which picture of these various realities, what they're made of, what it would look like, and which of them is correct. In both of these election years, Marist College and New York Times Siena predicted a historically good performance for the Democratic Party. Obviously, this 2020 result would be an absolute blowout, and the midterm performance would be historic for a midterm to do that well in midterm. And in 2022, Democrats did have a historical performance for a midterm, but in 2020, things didn't quite shake out, and frankly, they couldn't have done worse of a job in 2020 unless they were to say Texas was blue, which only the most radical people suggested as a possibility. This goes to show that sometimes you can be an extremely biased pollster, but still right if you just predict the reality that is most beneficial for a candidate, or you predict a certain type of reality, and then if that reality happens to come true, then you will appear accurate. So we know a pollster can be extremely accurate on the dot and biased, but many people, sometimes even because of this, they see a pollster that has a history of being inaccurate and being biased. So they explain the inconsistency, the difference, the divide between some of the polls and their narrative by simply dismissing or explaining away the polls' difference between them by saying they have a history of inaccuracy and they have a leaning or skewing to one side or the other. But because we know that accurate pollster, there's a pollster that is accurate in 1 year, even extremely accurate, can be bad, that being a bad and biased pollster doesn't actually preclude you from making a good poll in the present or in the future or sometime in your past. Let's go back to 2022. Without hindsight, if you were to apply the logic that the polls that were bad last cycle should be dismissed or should be given lower preference or should not be listened to, or you can say, well, that's a biased or that's a not reputable, not respectable pollster, then you would have had really no choice but to discard the pollsters that were most accurate that year. And then the next 2 years, you would have to be saying they're the best in the industry. I mean, let's take another look at these margins. If you follow this line of logic consistently, there's no excuse. You would have had to have discarded these polls. So no one will actually follow. I don't see anyone follow this line of logic consistently, which is good because it would be dumb. But we do see people follow this line of logic inconsistently, which I shouldn't have to explain why you follow lines of logic not consistently. But people do it, and the inconsistency in this is mostly whether the polls align or not with their partisan stance. As an example, I'll take a video that I responded to last month. In this video, he talks about Marist as a reputable pollster. In contrast to Rasmussen, and Rasmussen as unreputable in contrast to Marist. Because Rasmussen, unlike Marist, in the past had made an inaccurate poll, which I'm afraid Marist has made quite a few. And what was this poll that Rasmussen made? Rasmussen made a poll in which they had Donald Trump at a positive approval rating post January 6th. Now, even though there was no election on that, there was no election to determine whether it was accurate or not. If a poll of details of a poll contradict what we already know about reality enough, it more delegitimizes the poll rather than what we know about reality. For example, if you were to see a poll that had Trump up in DC or Harris up in Wyoming, from what you would already know, you would say that is too contradictory to what I would already know. Either the world has turned upside down and everything we knew before is somehow flipped on its head, or this poll is wrong, and this poll being wrong is most likely one. And we see with the Donald Trump January 6th example, we don't need an election to kind of determine that. Now, what's ironic is that this Rasmussen poll he was mentioning, in contrast to Marist, and Marist had published a poll that, and he was mentioning Marist as reputable to give backing to the poll that he was talking about today. And what was the poll that he was talking about in that video? A poll that showed Biden's approval rating increasing after the debate and him gaining in the race. If you watch enough beheadings, you will inevitably get used to it, but sometimes hypocrisy, actually all the times, hypocrisy just doesn't get old. It's actually quite stunning how people can be so hypocritical, say one thing, and then the absolute other in the next breath. Now, that poll the approval rating of that poll was an absolute outlier. It was at -7. The closest to it was 6 away at it was 6 points away, right? So if you care about the polls anyway, it's an outlier. But he wrote off, unlike the Trump January 6th poll, which we can tell was inaccurate without an election, simply because it contradicts what we can see and observe with our own eyes. He wrote off the Biden collapsing post-debate as something pushed down our throats by pundits. And he said, well, pundits are indicating that Biden is collapsing, as if that's why, as if the pundits, the news people saying why is why we think it, rather than we all saw it and we knew it. In the video, he did choose to believe over the supposedly the pundits that Biden was in fact gaining an approval rating. He said we're seeing a consistent trend of him gaining an approval. And it didn't say Biden was gaining overall like the poll did in the margin, but he did say that Biden is arguably in a better position than in June before the debate. And I bring all this up because you shouldn't follow the line of logic consistently either, but if you follow this line of logic, you have a temptation to follow this line of logic inconsistently. It's likely because it is convenient for you to do this sometimes, but not others. And I'm not saying to judge polls at all or to not use them, but if polls are wrong in the past and polls are wrong in the present and they are right in the past and they're right in the present, there's a reason in that falls in the details that make up the picture they painted of the reality, and so that's what you must judge them by instead of lazily writing them off. That's all.